So, business news these days is often a story of restructuring and layoffs and people fearful for their jobs related to AI. Today, I have a guest to discuss what's actually changing about all those topics, about workforce models and hiring. That whole discussion is coming up right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams. This is the HR Hub, and on this show, we talk about all kinds of things related to HR. I encourage you to please subscribe to the show or to the podcast to keep learning from my amazing guests. So today, my guest is Dr. Nita Chhinzer. Nita is an associate professor of HR at the University of Guelph, and she's an expert on current trends in restructuring and employment. She blends her research and practice with engaging in consulting and executive professional development around strategic HR. Hi, Nita. How are you?
Hi. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for coming on. I'm looking forward to this and looking forward to the insights about what's really happening. Just what's really happening.
Yes, and
there's a lot
not
happening.
The books, because the books were written a long time ago. We're going forward thinking today.
Right. That's right. So what are you hearing from employers and employees about recruitment challenges right now?
It's absolutely wild. We're having conversations with employers, and I do on a weekly basis, where they're saying things like, we're having a really hard time finding employees. We don't know where they are. We're unable to get good quality candidates, or all of our candidates look the same. And then on the other side, I'm having conversations with new grads, with executives who are coming back into the system, with alumni, and overall with the stats people in the labor economics world. And they're saying that people are having a hard time finding jobs. So what's really interesting is we've got this significant mismatch right now where employees are saying they can't find jobs and employers are saying they can't find workers. And that's a really weird dichotomy that we're existing in right now.
That does seem weird. What is
It's
actually happening there?
Well, okay, so what's happening here is that employers have been traditionally relying on their old systems to try to find talent. And the way that employers brought on employees was they would generally bring them in for entry-level positions. And then, 50% of people on average work through the organization. So there was a lot of internal mobility. And that first entry-level job was kind of a feeder into getting exposure to an individual, figuring out what their skills are, training them, developing them, and then using them within the organization. But organizations are beginning to flatten out. And they're flattening out not just because of technology, but because they're trying to be more cost effective. They're trying to be more responsive to shareholder demands. They're trying to reduce redundancies. So they're flattening out. And a lot of these entry-level jobs are really gone now. Some of them have been replaced by technology. Some of them have been outsourced out of the country because they're perceived to be highly repetitive entry-level jobs. And companies are now saying that we don't have the internal talent that we need. What they're doing is they're going outside and they're saying, okay, let's go put an ad up on Indeed. And what's happening on the employee side is employees have tuned in. And they're now tailoring their resumes and tailoring everything. They're essentially feeding the job description and their resume into AI, finding a perfect match, and then feeding that back into the system. So now employers are like, oh my goodness, I cannot differentiate between a good candidate and a bad candidate because every candidate is beginning to look the same. And now what they're beginning to do is push back on some of those traditional networking and recruitment techniques that were not open to everybody. So they're going back and they're asking employees for referrals because rather than going out into the abyss and getting 3,000 applicants, it's easier for me to deal with, 30 potential referrals or 10 potential referrals. I feel like some of that screening has gone through my existing staff. So it's kind of like this crowdsourcing of recruitment by asking your employees to go and get referrals. Sometimes they're being incentivized. They're being told, oh, you'll get $500 if someone stays on for 1 month or 6 months or 10 months, or you'll get $10,000 if they end up getting some really high executive. So they're going to the networking sites, their referral sites, they're going to networking sites. So they're going to the places like career fairs, or they're going to places where they think that they might be able to find talent like professional associations. For example, an accounting professional association is probably a good spot to go to find an accountant. But those people who are outside of that association, outside of that event, are essentially like locked out of that employment recruitment realm. And the other thing that they're doing is they're going towards uh, recruitment agencies. So recruitment agencies are becoming more important because recruitment agencies essentially pre-screen and have a bench ready of people who are willing to do work that have been screened. So these employees are having a hard time finding a job. They are out of those places now that employers are going to go find work.
Right. Okay. So that's part of the discussion today. And I think we're going to come back to uh, some of those topics because I do want to dig into some of those more. But I also want to talk about the other side of it, which is creating people who need to have jobs or who are looking for jobs. It's the whole restructuring piece. When you look at how organizations are restructuring right now, I'm like so fascinated by this. What patterns do you see?
I'm seeing the same patterns others are seeing,
Okay.
and in the sense that there is a delayering happening. So there has been a reduction of middle management, and part of that was for redundancies. Part of that is because middle management is perceived to be like not adding as much value as the other organizational members. We're also seeing a lot of outsourcing happening. So that is something that is
Yeah.
part of the global phenomenon. And we've been seeing that happen for some time, but it is now tech-enabled outsourcing. I recently had a really interesting conversation with a grocery store. And the grocery store traditionally moved away from, 16 different front desk clerks or clerks that were doing the cashier jobs to these self-checkouts. And I don't know about you, but I generally hate self-checkouts because I'm like, now you're downshifting that job to me as the consumer, and I got to figure out what the banana code is, right? And I got to figure out how to scan this off. So they're
Memorized. Have it memorized.
yeah, right. So they're downshifting the work to us, but then they realize that they could also, that one person who's walking around helping you. There was one company that also realized that rather than one person walking around, maybe I could put a little iPad looking feature up.
So,
And when you need help, you push a button and somebody shows up. And that person was actually someone from Bangladesh who showed up and said, what is your issue? Or my issue is I don't know, are these Granny Smith apples or are they Macintosh apples? Oh, those look like Granny Smith. The code would be 7235, whatever the code is. And that issue was resolved. Well, people domestically were having a problem with that. They said, now you got rid of those 18 or 16 cashiers. You put in 3 help desk people. Now you're getting rid of the help desk people and you're actually outsourcing that to a different country. And we're really upset about this. Now, the company, of course, is focused on hyper efficiency. So they say when I had one person, maybe they were being used for 15 minutes of the hour or 20 minutes of the hour. But now that I can outsource this to another country, not only am I paying lower labor costs, but they're more efficient. Because when they're not being used on the site in New York, they're being used on a site in California. They could be used anywhere. So there
yes.
was this yin yang that happened. And that's an example of how this restructuring is coming from a very complicated place where employers are trying to build in hyper efficiencies and employees are looking for job security. And unfortunately, that's not the truth of what's being offered to employees today. So if we got to advance the conversation today on anything, it would be to employees to get them to think about taking control of their own job security, because the concept that employers are going to provide that, I think, is completely outdated. And in the next 10 years, it will not occur. You'll be in charge of your own careers. You'll be in charge of your own risks. And looking to employers for help for that is just an unrealistic expectation in the short to medium term future, in my opinion.
You're accepting the reality, and I'm not sure I do, but the way that and because I'm consulting, I do it all the time of separating, like separations and letting people go. And the impact it has on people is just huge.
But I think
Um,
it's so naive. It's so naive to think that companies are not going to engage in job loss because we're demanding job security. Companies are going to engage in job loss. Like that is the baseline truth now.
mhm,
And either you could be receptive and prepared for it, or you could
mhm.
be resistant. But the end outcome is still the same for you. So why not engage in the practices They're going to help you get employed.
Mhm. It just becomes, your job is not your job, though. So your job is, you have to go to work, 8 hours a day, but then you have to go to work to make sure you're employable later,
Yeah.
another couple hours a day.
But I would rather have that than have people who know that their job is going to come to an end, or feel that there might be some level of job insecurity and spend hours a day invested in stress and not properly coping,
Mhm.
rather than spending hours a day in stress, spend hours a day in building and
Mhm. Yeah.
networking, and meeting people and showcasing your skills and advertising yourself. You'll feel better and you'll be in a better position. So it's almost like unlocking, and it's tough because it does come across as a tough conversation. Unlocking this idea that I'm the victim of job loss. So job loss is natural to everybody right now. There's
Yeah.
no job that's safe from job loss.
Yeah.
So what can I do to take care of what's in my control?
I wasn't planning on asking this question, but now I have to know. How do employees it's a bit off topic, but how do employees manage their own job security?
It comes down to taking kind of the bull by the horns. So there's a couple of things you have to do. One
Mm,
is in this era of restructuring and recruitment, so it does actually link back to our initial recruitment topic, is you have to worry about developing your own skills and competencies.
uh,
So employers are no longer going to offer you the ability to go in and learn on the job. There's this perception that we can go to places that offer micro credentials or get some training on something, but we have to demonstrate that skill or that responsibility. And no longer are employees really bringing us and using these entry level jobs as training grounds for us, right? That's
mhm.
not being offered much anymore, and it won't
Oh,
be in the future.
mm,
The second thing we have to do is really become aware that in the past, our perception is that humans are adaptable to change, but a lot of these conversations around restructuring and employment are happening behind closed doors. So it becomes a sudden change. To
mm,
them, it's not new. To them, they're having these conversations for a couple of months. We've had a decline. We lost a customer. Our competitor is doing this. And now they're coming to us with their final solution. So sometimes it catches us off guard that, wow,
mhm.
this change is happening. And in traditional sectors like healthcare and tech, where we thought those jobs were really high in demand, restructuring is happening there too. And companies are really looking to continuously adapt their workforce to whatever their external environmental needs are. So, one thing I would recommend is be part of the meetings and be part of the groups that employers are now going to recruit in. So that unfortunately does mean like getting out of your house, participating in networking, keeping
Oh, yeah.
yourself active. The second
Mhm,
thing would be to go out and be ready for change. So
mm.
recognize that this employer is not going to offer you job security for the time that you're employed. That's great, but if you are no longer employed, it's your job to make sure that you are employable. So stay up to tune with what's going on. Continue to update yourself. Get the information that you need. And then the third thing that I'd recommend too is focus on your competencies. Really think about what you are good at and don't get stuck with your job title. Don't get stuck with your industry. And more employers are recruiting for people who are demonstrating the ability to learn. So you want to really lean into this idea that recruitment in the past might have been around where you went to school, how many years of work experience you had, if you had this designation. But now it's more about, are you adaptable? Are you a problem
Mm.
solver? Are you uh, able to adapt to change? Are you willing to learn? And those seem to be the ways that will propel people into that potential candidate pool.
So the restructurings are happening alongside a lot of, well, lots of headlines about massive layoffs,
Yes.
and job losses. So what's actually driving all that, those layoffs, the restructuring, and how much does AI play into that?
AI is, I think, taking a lot of the heat for the
Mhm,
layoffs, but it's not AI alone. So,
mhm,
technology enabled layoffs are essentially around productivity. And
mhm.
companies are leaning into tech because it is the way of the future. But at the same time, we have a lot of other things going on. So, there is a lot of geopolitical uncertainty. And if you
Mhm.
follow the narrative, we'll see how many different spaces and places are in conflict right now that's creating a very macro level uncertainty. And the
Mhm.
companies don't know where they're getting their supplies, who they're selling to, whether their clients are active or not. And that macro level uncertainty has caused companies to say what we need to do is be as lean as possible so we
Mm.
could be agile. They
Mhm.
don't want a talent hoard anymore. They're saying maybe what we could do is move to other models. We see this, for example, in the tech industry. The tech
Mhm.
industry during COVID really got into talent hoarding. They realized in the tech industry that, oh my gosh, I need an engineer. Engineers are hard to find, or coders are hard to find. And they just hired. And they paid premiums to hire and keep people who weren't actively producing anything because they didn't want their competitors to have it. And in the last 5 years, for example, with the tech industry, we've seen the pendulum swing. And now what they've done is they've moved towards these temporary gigs. They've moved towards contract jobs. They've moved towards laying off the people that they hired at premiums when there
Mhm.
was a shortage of people in the tech industry, to now laying off the premium employees and rehiring at market values. So they're
Mm.
using layoffs as a tool to fix some of the compensation problems they had. They're using
Mm.
layoffs as a tool to share the risk of uncertainty by saying, I can't hoard talent. Now, instead, what I'll do is I'll just hire on an as needed basis. It's
Mhm.
almost like just in time talent. They went
Mhm.
from having the talent on their bench strength to being like, well, over the next couple of months, I'll need someone who's good at this thing and I'll need someone who's good at that thing. And they're not projecting out so far. So part of it comes from AI. Part of it comes from this geopolitical environment that's causing mass uncertainty. And part of it is also coming from the shifting nature of global demographics. Last year, there were only a few countries that actually grew in demographics. But we do have a birthing crisis. And that birthing crisis is causing us to really see a big shift in demographics. So our younger demographics are the ones who are tech savvy, the ones who are willing to do things. And our older demographic, this is new, it's relatively new in their lifetime. The older demographics are also putting pressure on certain things like pressures on the healthcare system.
Mm.
So health expenses are going up and that industry is growing. Whereas the education industry for younger education is shrinking a little bit. And then we're coming back into the education industry now, focusing on like over 40s and saying, if you want this approach to lifelong learning, we have to hire on people who are willing to teach at exact levels. So all of those demographic changes result in changes to who your clients are. So if your
Mm.
client needs change, you have to change to adapt to that.
Now I'm going to circle back to the skills mismatch that
Yes.
you talked about initially, and where employers can't find the talent they want, but there are skilled people out there. And so it's like this,
Yes. Yes.
what is
Yeah.
happening?
So employers, and part of it has to do with these small businesses. They don't have the managerial training to
Mm.
know how to use the systems. Large businesses, because they have so much bulk and mass hiring, they don't invest in the training and development. But there's lots of ways in which you can actually say, you know, can I actually go and assess the skills that are relevant to the job? For example, if someone wants to assess your risk assessment, there are interesting games that you can play to actually try to determine how risky
Mm.
someone is.
Yes.
And it
Yeah.
could be games like there's a balloon popping game. And you've probably seen it at science centers if you have kids, where you push a button and you push a button and you collect points for every time you push the button, and the balloon keeps getting bigger until eventually it pops. And you do it over 10 balloons and you have an average. That essentially is testing someone's risk assessment. And so
Mm.
there's fun ways that you can test for that, but employers aren't necessarily using that. They're using the traditional methodology. I'll look at a resume, I'll screen the resume, bring them in for an interview. I'm not going to train the interviewer on what to do. I'll bring them in for an interview and then assume that the interviewer had a fair assessment and didn't follow their gut feel. And
Mhm.
that's possibly what's leading to the mismatch in the skills that are being brought on. So the other thing that's leading to the skills mismatch is a geographic mismatch. So the skills that you need might not necessarily be in the area in which you need them geographically. For example, again, because I'm in Canada, we have international talent coming here all the time. And I see international talent that really wants to expand this idea that we could get into, say, the textiles industry or other industries. But those industries aren't necessarily big in our region. And rather than me saying to employers that, hey, listen, you've got to change the nature of the job, my recommendation to employees is, if you want a job and your industry is in decline or your local region doesn't have a lot of employment in that, and you can find transferability of your skills, you should be able to think about moving and move to where the jobs are. And we
Mhm.
do know that regional unemployment rates vary.
Mhm.
We have certain spaces that have become completely emptied out because of the auto sector decline. And people who were traditionally auto sector workers had transferable skills but didn't want to change their geography. Well, we
Yeah.
can't create jobs in your geography, but there are other geographies in which that job might be. It might be a city that's 2 hours away. It might be a city that's 10 hours away. But
Mhm.
maybe those are the kinds of decisions we're going to have to make during times of restructuring.
Yeah, those are big decisions though, and, if ever there's a mass exodus of people, then your housing prices drop, and,
Yes.
that is can be, very financially impactful.
And you've got
Um
a spouse working or a family
Oh,
member
yeah,
working. There's so many dual
exactly.
income
Yeah.
households. Kids are in school. You've got aging parents nearby. Like, our generation definitely has it very tough to make those decisions. But I do think that we have to really either adapt to think about where our skills could apply within our geography. And if not, then think about moving geographies if we want to remain employed.
Or become an entrepreneur, which is
Yes.
also a scary proposition. We won't go there. All right, can you tell me about AI? Um, I keep hearing about how AI is eliminating entry level positions.
Mhm.
And it was it's pretty obvious that it might do that. But people need to start somewhere and build skills. I keep asking this question, what's going to happen to the new grad? Like, what's going to happen? What are the opportunities for them? I keep asking people. No one has had a decent answer yet. Maybe you're the first.
I think that what's happened is there has been a drying out of entry level work. And
Mhm.
employers are naively thinking that they can eliminate that, but they still have a high dependency on
Mhm.
internal promotions. So, where are you now going to hire for a mid level employee when you
Mhm.
haven't had any entry level employees to practice, get exposed to, normalize your culture with, train? So it's a
Yeah.
really naive short-term approach to say that we're going to take our entry level workers and, not give them full-time jobs. We'll give
Mhm.
them internships, we'll give them part-time jobs, or we'll eliminate this altogether, or we'll go offshore. So it does seem to be a poor short-term strategy for organizations.
Mhm.
What I do recommend to them is that organizations should look at this as an investment. So,
Mhm.
unfortunately, many organizations look at human resources as a cost, but you
Mhm.
can look at this as an investment where if you get 4 to 6 months worth of exposure to an individual, you're in a better position to then fit them within the organization later on.
Mhm.
And these investments often come, and this is my advice to employees, in the form of non-standard work arrangements. So we think about jobs, we think about Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, like
Yes.
this
Yeah.
archaic concept of a job being 40 hours a week, 5 days of the week. But these other non-traditional work arrangements are, it could be part-time, it could be contract, it could be internships, it could be gig work. It could be that you're doing this one component, but it helps you get exposure to the organization.
Mhm.
And a lot of the new careers that we're beginning to see are less
Mm.
about me having a full-time job and expecting job security, and it's more about me taking on this protean career, like a just-in-time career, where I say, "These are the skills that I have to offer. I can go and be a professor in these 5 classes and teach those, and that's gonna consume 25 hours of my week, and then I can go and consult in this, then I can go and speak on that, then I can go and train somebody in this." So it's the same base skill that I have, but rather than
Mhm.
having one employer offer me full-time employment, I'm pieceworking the work as my skills become more and more applicable. And we
Mm,
saw this really um, as something not just because of AI, but also because the platforms like Freelance or Fiverr,
mhm. Yeah,
there's
yeah,
platforms that allow you to do this. And that conversation started like I'm a big fan of Dwayne the Rock Johnson, right? It started when there's that concept of like hustle culture.
yeah.
There was like the girl bosses and people who were entrepreneurs and people who had side jobs and multiple job holders. And they were seen to be the hustlers and the movers and the shakers. And those
Mhm,
were the ones who are really exploring new opportunities and keeping themselves financially secure while taking risk in one place, but not taking risk in another. So it's really changed how we approach our careers. And it's
mhm,
not just AI driven, it's driven by a whole host of technological approaches.
mhm. From an employee perspective, that sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting, and the risk is all downshifted to us as employees.
Mhm,
If the company decides not to hire, if if there is a freeze happening, and they're happening across the globe right now, hiring
mm,
freezes, layoffs, restructurings, delayerings, they're happening across the globe now. That means that we now are taking on the brunt of trying to find where employment is, trying to
mhm,
demonstrate the value of what I can add. And the way that we would do that, of course, is by doing three primary things. One is we have to engage in continuous learning. And that continuous learning, we have to demonstrate that. So that means that you have to actually like build your own personal brand. And if this is the type of career that you want, or this is the type of career that you've been forced into, the realistic thing is that you have to say that I'm good at this, and then you build a brand, go on podcasts, create a LinkedIn site, create some social media presence for yourself around that brand. Second is
mhm,
to demonstrate that learning. So get the micro credentials, get those little badges, demonstrate that you are actively involved in that conversation. And then the third is networking. And to
mhm,
network, you have to be part of groups. You have to go out and participate. And now
mhm,
participation is very different from membership. Easy for me to say I'm a member of the Canadian Association of Management Consultants, but there's like 2,000 members. Is my membership significant? Am I contributing in a way? Am I meeting people? Am I going out and doing something with that membership where my presence is becoming known? So it's like it's really shifting a lot of the way that we think about our careers and who's responsible. And it
mhm.
is and has been traditionally more and more us being responsible for our own careers.
Where can someone find you if, they wanted to reach out for more information on any of these topics?
So speaking about networking, I'm on LinkedIn, so that's always a great space to find, and so that's where you build your personal brand. I do have a website, www.nitachinzer.com, and I've been at University of Guelph in the Department of Management for the last 19 years. I'll probably stay there as long as they'll keep me, and so if you're looking for me, that might be a good place too. A lot of
Oh.
my work is global and focused on executive decision making, but I do
Mhm.
help individuals who are trying to reapproach their careers as well, because it is definitely a huge mindset shift.
Well, thanks, Nita. I loved that. I'm thinking about, we have always actually been responsible for our own careers and development. And when you get complacent, that's when you run into trouble. But now it seems like it's gone up another level. Nita talked about popping the balloon as just one of many approaches. I have done a couple episodes on psychometric testing, and a link to one of those is right here. Thanks for watching out there, and we'll see you next time.